Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Well, Carrie, I run a X million dollar consultancy. We do very well for ourselves. We don't have any problems. Right?
How many times have we had this conversation? Let's talk about it. It's possible, I suppose. But what is really interesting about people that speak in this way, and we hear it a lot, right, is the notion that revenue is the thing. And by the thing, I mean the only thing by which I measure the health of my business and my own satisfaction.
What could be more important, Carrie?
Yeah, so as you know, given that we work with people who are building their consultancies, and most often they come into this space from a world where they have, a ton of experience, and they've decided that they can take that experience out into the market on their own and, do good work and have good impact. What is true about using revenue as your only indicator is that it doesn't speak to the very things that had you start this business in the beginning. And yes, of course, revenue was one of those things. But if you're a consultant, you also started this business because you wanted, some level of autonomy and ownership and agency that maybe you didn't have previously. You wanted to have, a certain level of freedom to live your life the way you wanted. You wanted to work with a particular subsegment of clients whom you find interesting and, to whom you can really deliver something of great value. These are all things that, although they're connected to revenue in some way, are not at all measured by the amount of revenue that you're collecting.
It's kind of like using weight as your number one overarching measure of health and fitness.
Yes.
And ignoring body composition altogether. Like, as long as I'm a certain weight, regardless of what my body composition is, how much fat I have, how much lean muscle mass I have, my
Endurance,
other, biomarkers,
yes.
like, cortisol, cholesterol, like ignore, like, just, no, it's weight.
Yes.
As long as I'm within a certain weight, I am healthy. It's interesting because I'm going to run with this metaphor. This. I've gotten a lot more serious about health and fitness, and it's caused me to step back and question, what are my actual goals? Because I didn't really know when I delved. I just started working out, right? And I have like vain goals, right? But like, apart from that, what do I actually want? And when I think about that, what I want is quality of life. I want great energy, the ability to play with my kids and do the sports that I enjoy, and like I want to enjoy life. And I want longevity. I want to not die, essentially, right? Sooner than I should. I want to extend lifespan as much as possible. And it's a great way to think about your business, right? If revenue is weight, right, it's not necessarily a great measure of organizational health. Just like weight could have a lot of waste, revenue can have a lot of waste. My question to you is, revenue aside, to you, the listener, revenue aside, what's your lifestyle like, to your point, right? Like, how much do you actually enjoy? In my case, it's about what I do with my kids and the sports that I play and, the leisurely activities that bring joy. But what is your joy in your business? How much are you enjoying it? That's question number one. And question number two is, what's the longevity of your business like? How solid is it? Is it going to last? And we've talked about this in previous episodes. If you got one wheel client in your $1 million business, I am not impressed. I'm scared. I'm worried. Right? And we're poking fun here, but geez, how many times people come to us and they got on a call with our team and they go, in the application form to get on a call. They have $1 million in revenue. Oh yeah, we're doing 7 figures. Oh yeah, how many clients do you have? Well, we got a big one. Hey, how big? Well, they make up about $800,000 to the million. I mean, come on, right? Like that's risky. I'm worried now about the longevity of your business because if that client goes away, you don't have a business.
Well, I was just going to say, quite frankly, it's really not a business, right? Like you're essentially employed, and losing your job is just as dangerous as it would be if you were actually like technically employed. The other thing that comes up for me as we talk about this is the notion of the delayed gratification versus what's happening now. Because I also see people get into a trap of, I'm just going to work really hard and get all the money. And I can do that for a while until what? We're never sure, right? But until the day that I can decide to live the lifestyle that I want, until the day that I can decide to work with the people that I want, until the day that I feel like I have enough. When what we know is that it's really hard as human beings to feel like we have enough, right? And to make that leap. And so there's also something here about determining, both in terms of revenue and in terms of all of the other indicators that we're talking about, what's important today in terms of how I'm walking through my day from 9 to 5 or whatever I'm working, versus what's going to be important in the future. Because if all you're doing is collecting revenue for some future goal that you can't really see, the motivation around that doesn't last very long.
So I don't think I understand. Are you promoting or discouraging longer term thinking?
I will promote longer term thinking, but what I want to discourage is pushing back goals in all of the other areas of your business, presuming that you're going to get there someday. So this is kind of like, anybody, and let's use how you spend your money as the metaphor. So we all know the person who is just, never spends a dime, saves everything for retirement. And then retirement comes and they're not able or, not in a position to do the things that they've been saving all the money for, right? Very different than people who make a conscious decision to decide how much to spend now to allow themselves to live the kind of life that they want to live. So if we take that back to your business, if all you're doing is chasing revenue and that is making you work, either too much or do work that you don't want to do, or has you making decisions that don't serve the arguably larger purpose of building the business that you want, that yes, gets you revenue, then that's the kind of thinking that I want to be really, really cautious about.
So this is interesting because I think what I did in the initial kind of formative years of this business, in some ways, are at odds with what you're saying, and in some ways are not. So I'll explain that. My attitude, and you remember me saying this probably. My attitude was I want to get to X revenue, and I would literally use these words. And I will do whatever it takes to get there. I don't care about I'm not optimizing for my time or for my enjoyment, for my status. I'm just going to get here. And when we get there, we'll optimize it. And as long as I don't lose my shirt in the process, I will take whatever risk I need to take to get there. That was my attitude. And that's what we did.
Yes and no. So yes, that's what we did. But also you had, I think what you're not considering as you talk about it is a very solid underlying understanding of how you were going to live your life as well. And really, radical clarity around who you wanted to work with. So yes, absolutely, you had a goal, you were working towards it, but I don't believe it was really at the expense of everything else. You didn't take, every client that wanted you to do everything. You didn't, work 150 hours a week. Those things were non-starters. And I think to the point that maybe you don't even consider them now.
No, it's fair. Like, I think on the one hand, my wife and I recall this. I was absolutely working, there's a point at which a pretty good stretch I was working 10 hours a day, like kind of 9 to 7, Monday to Friday. Rarely worked weekends, regardless. But I was working a lot at one point. And I was doing it for the purposes of building the things so I could get to the point where I didn't have to do all the things, right? Like for me, the revenue was about getting to a point where I can build the team piece by piece by piece. So I don't have to work as hard as I was, or more than working hard, I didn't have to do all the things. I could focus on the things that I'm actually world class at and have other people be focused on things that they're world class at, as opposed to me doing everything kind of, in a mediocre way. But also, I wasn't like, I want this revenue no matter where I can get it, to your point, right? And so I think a lot of the mistakes that our, clients, listeners make is, they want to make $1 million revenue a year, and a client comes along and says, here's $1 million contract. And they go, I guess we're done. Right?
Yeah.
One client, one source takes up all of our capacity. Now we get $1 million business. I was very concerned and deliberate about making sure it was sustainable, that we had a machine, a system, all the way from the advertising to the marketing to the sales process to the delivery. Like we built the factory, so to speak, so that we could feed raw material into the production line and spit out an outcome, which is, ultimately what we did.
Yeah, and I think that's a significant difference, right? Even though you were maybe articulating it like, I want to get to a certain, revenue milestone, your real focus was on building the machine. Because if your real focus had been the revenue milestone, then you would have done all those things that we just talked about. And so, yeah, I think that there was a singular focus there on the creation of the thing, which is different than getting to the number.
And I come back to longevity being the thing, right? Like I think revenues is fine. It's great. It's fantastic. Who doesn't want revenue?
We all want
Absolutely.
it.
Everybody wants revenue.
Yes.
But I think if there's one thing I would want people to think about as a companion to revenue, it's longevity. I mean, assuming that you want to be in business for a minute, right? Like, I guess this doesn't apply to you if you're like, no, I want to get in, make as much money as possible, and I want to just get out in like 3 to 5 years. Okay. I think that's rare. I don't know a lot of people like that, right? Assuming this is your career and you want to dedicate the next, whatever it is, 10, 20, 30, 40 years to it, then longevity ought to be a question. Earn the revenue, absolutely, but is that revenue sustainable? Do you know where it's coming from? Do you know where the next client's coming from? Do you have a pipeline? Do you have a system to bring in new leads consistently? If you don't, I think longevity is at risk, and you ought to be concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think longevity for sure. And then there are also just some other kind of, deep-seated core values that are going to be different for people. So, for a lot of the folks that we work with, I can think of several, right off the top of my head, impact is important, right? And there's a willingness to, make concessions around revenue in order to have impact. For others, it is lifestyle. And so this is really all about balance, which is, everything goes back to balance, I think. Where it's just necessary to be so clear about what's important to you. Because if it is impact and all you need is a minimal level of revenue, then you're going to make different decisions than if it is, creating some level of generational wealth for your family, and that's your guiding priority. And so, as most things, this goes back to being clear and, quite frankly, honest with yourself around what the most important thing is, and recognizing that revenue and money in general is just a tool, always will be a tool. It's not really a thing, right? There's nothing about money itself that is helpful or useful to anybody. It's about what you can do with it. It's about what you can trade it for. It's about what it means to you. It's about, how it contributes to your identity. And so getting past that, quite frankly, superficial measurement of revenue and understanding the so what behind it makes all the difference.
It's interesting because as you lay out all those considerations personally, and I think people will read this differently because we all care about different things. Personally, I'm tying everything back to longevity because I'm like, impact. Well, yeah, that is an input to longevity. Because if I don't feel good about the impact I'm having on the clients that I serve and the market that I serve, I'm not going to do it for very long. And that's just human nature. If you don't feel good about it, how sustainable is it? And, profitability, that's required for longevity, because you can only go so long without making any money before you start to question, should I be doing this? Lifestyle balance, that's required for longevity, because I'll tell you right now, if I was still doing what I was doing a couple of years ago, burning the candle at both ends, there would be zero longevity here. Right. So to me, all of those are required: the profitability, the impact, the balance, the lifestyle. All of those are required for me to see myself doing this for as long as I do.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. The question is really around how you move those levers, because that's where the adjustment occurs. Each of those things that you talked about is going to be differently important to different people. And so, yeah, this is a know yourself moment once again.
So the question for you listening is, you come up with your own criteria. I mean, that was a litany of ideas that make sense to us, but what ultimately are you going to use to grade and assess and measure the health of your business?